Today, we will go over trading short positions with my HEIKIN ASHI strategy. I've been getting so many DMs and emails about it. Actually, it's quite simple. Just flip the strategy and use it. However, I would like to show you the basic differences between long and short positions. Their nature is quite different. I'll mostly go over cryptocurrency examples. If you want to remember the strategy, please watch my first two HEIKIN ASHI trading videos. Hello friends, hope you're doing great. I got really nice feedbacks and emails about my HEIKIN ASHI trading strategy. Some people specifically asked for using it for short positions. I decided to shoot a video about it. If you enjoy opening short positions, you may find it useful. Before we start, I would like to talk about the free content which I will share from now on. From now on, I decided to share everything I do with you. Every document, PDF file, Excel files, indicators, codes, all for free. You may ask, why free? Because in the last 10 years, I've learned almost everything for free. I've maybe just paid for a couple of advanced stuff or just for supporting the publisher. Thanks to all my mentors. It's same with my computer science and game programming career. 95% of my coding knowledge comes from the internet, and other 5% is from the university. Nowadays, what I see, even a very simple and easy knowledge like what is an intrinsic value is tried to be sold for $100 or $1,000. Crazy things going on. So, what's in the free content? I'll be sharing PDF and image versions of what I teach in videos, if you want to keep it. Furthermore, as a software engineer, I'm coding so many indicators for TradingView and Thinkorswim platforms. Please wait for Thinkorswim codes, incredibly helpful for day traders. I also have many experimental codes for TradingView. All these will be available for free. Okay, if you're ready, let's start. Before HEIKIN ASHI, I would like to talk about the nature of long and short positions. Later on, I'll focus on trading with HEIKIN ASHI. First of all, trading short positions or short selling requires more advanced skills and lots of practice than trading longs. Let's see a couple of charts and understand them. As you can see in this Bitcoin chart, it took around 1 month price to reach from around 50,000 to 60,000. But it took like 2-3 days to go back to 50,000. What I would like to say is that drops in financial securities are much faster and sharper than rises generally. This is not a universal rule, and it won't happen all the time. The price of anything is determined by supply and demand. This is 100% true. But what affects supply and demand? It's fear, greed, and a cocktail of human emotions. So deep down, fear and greed shape the supply and demand, and finally the price of any financial security. But which one is more powerful? Well, in my experience, fear is more powerful in the short term. Greed is powerful in the long term. Actually, there are 4 phases of this: hope, greed, regret, and fear. There's a reason why I really love pullback breakouts, because pullback breakouts are the start of a new hope. We are entering a trade after all sellers or buyers are exhausted. Let's see the chart. After this breakout, a new hope starts. Then we assume that it's the beginning of a rally. Evaluation of long positions take time, because people have so much time to observe the security before entering. Then it slowly turns to greed. More people join the rally. This is called road from hope to greed. This is where FOMO happens, fear of missing out. At some point, this rally ends because we are surpassing maximum potential of intrinsic value for that moment. This top point is extreme greed. When you enter a trade at the top of a rally, you will start feeling regret. Because smart traders are sitting on over 15-20% profit, with a leverage 100% maybe. This is where smart traders take profit. Unless they forget their open positions like me sometimes and make awful decisions. Regret creates a snowball effect of fear. I've seen so many traders enter and exit their positions instantly out of fear, because they understand that they were too late. It is a bubble now and about to explode. Fear shuts down brains because unlike hope and greed, you may lose your capital if you are in the trade. Then people instantly sell their positions with regret and fear. Plus, other traders start to take profits from their positions or short the security. And we see the sharpest drops in the markets with a snowball effect. This is called road from regret to fear. Hope and greed are different. You have nothing to lose unless you enter the trade. So, as a result, road from hope to greed is slow, time to observe things. But road from regret to fear is quick because you are in the position and your life savings are on the line. I hope you gained a bit of knowledge about fear and greed. Why did I teach this? Because when you open your short positions and if you enter a trade late, you could lose your money. Because lifespan of short positions is generally shorter than long positions. Your entry should be great. I'll upload simple charts on Google Drive. You can get them there if you need them. So, what to do? Actually, it's simple. Try to use multiple charts. One for your entry, one for higher time frame to control what's happening. Because if you do not know what's happening on higher time frames, you could be at the end of a short rally or touching a strong support line. After sharp drops, there will be reactions, and you will see extremely long wicks. And you may be trying to short a security that is about to give a reaction on a higher time frame. This is why I tell people always check higher time frames before shorting any security. Okay, let's get back to examples. Well, short positions are actually exactly the same with long positions. Same strategy. You just flip everything. That's it. Just remember to check your higher time frames. The first two examples are not tradable because they are above the EMA 50. Even though the second one worked amazingly, I wouldn't mind it. You're gonna miss so many opportunities in your trading life. But the good thing is you can trade 7/24 nowadays, so opportunities never end. I'm quickly scanning stock RSI crossovers above the 50 line and see if there is a recent crossover. Please remember, you always enter a trade after a crossover. There are three more significant crossovers. When you see a crossover, please add the security to your watch list and then check later if a position becomes available to enter. As you can see, after a while, we have red HEIKIN ASHI bars with shaped flat tops. These are my entry bars. In these examples, I'll use the simple exit strategy of exiting with the first green HEIKIN ASHI bar. Finally, these bars are my exit bars. If you are a really busy person, this style may suit you. The next coin I'm checking is ENJUSDT. Actually, it's one of my favorite coins. However, price is like a roller coaster nowadays. Anyway, the first thing you should check is if the price is below EMA 50 or not. Secondly, I'm identifying stock RSI crossovers above the 50 line. There are 7 of them. The good thing is, when you see a stock RSI crossover, just add the asset into your watch list. Because, as I said before, we will enter after the crossover, not at the moment of crossover. This will give us time to observe the security before entering. Okay, my entry bars are so simple. First red candlesticks with shaped tops after small pullbacks. Now, 2 of the trades have failed. Actually, they have not exactly failed, but since we exit in the first green bars, as you can see, your exit almost equal to your entry. You would be not taking a significant loss from these trades, but there will be no profit either. Okay, exit points are the first green candlesticks, quite clear exits with nice profits. Now, I want to repeat the reality. No strategy in the world will work all the time. If there was such a thing, right now Elon Musk and Warren Buffett would be working for me. Now, check out what is happening right now. The first one would have stuck you out with a small loss. But the second one, look at this, with 5 or 10x leverage, you would have been getting over 100% profit. In the end, this is just a risk management game, and countless times of trying new positions and limiting your losses. Okay folks, I hope you gained some knowledge about the nature of short positions and how to trade them with HEIKIN ASHI. If you have any questions in your mind, please leave a comment below. I'm happy to answer them. I'll be uploading documents to Google Drive slowly, because I'm creating 4K versions of documents. You can find all the content for free. If you liked the video, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for me. Thank you, take care and see you soon.